welcome to Everest Group's webcast, Outsourcing Pricing and Commercial Trends of 2023. I'm Janet Ramey, Program Director and Senior Fellow with the Conference Board. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. If you need an attendance certificate for this webcast, please click on the icon shown to download your certificate at the end of the session. You can use that to claim continuing education credits if you hold a certification. Now, to get the most out of this webcast, please make sure to use the engagement tools provided. Those are located at the bottom of your screen. You can use these to ask questions to the presenter and download available resources. We will be taking questions, but they will be taken towards the end of the webcast. So if you're not seeing your question answered immediately, know that it will be managed and it will be answered towards the end of the webcast. Okay, next slide. So I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. Abhishek Sharma, Partner of Pricing Assurance with the Everest Group, and Bharat M., Vice President, Global Sourcing with the Everest Group. Over to you, Abhishek. Abhishek, you may be muted.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Okay, we seem to have lost Abhishek for a moment. Bharat, would you like to pick up?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon for all joining today's webcast. We're excited to share some of the latest insights and trends from our ongoing tracking of the outsourcing, pricing, and commercial landscape for 2023. We also have some interesting messages as we look into 2024. So in the session today, we'll be looking at market trends, supplier performance, macroeconomic changes that are essentially playing into this industry. We'll also look at what it means for GBS, especially the in-house model as well. With that, let me hand it over to my colleague Abhishek.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bharat. Can you hear me now, everyone?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so let's move forward and start the conversation onto the next slide. Right, so the environment for outsourced services, it has changed significantly in the past 12 months, right? So, if I were to just do a bit of time travel back 12 months, October of last year, it was all about demand surge, right? All enterprises asking, hey, where can I get the talent from? I need these people. Pricing, discounts, we can talk later. Please get me the talent, right? Right now, it's a lot to do about demand uncertainty, right? If we look at portfolios, outsourcing portfolios, it was all about diversification. And it was all linked to getting talent. If you can't get it from 1, 2, 3 suppliers, ask the fourth one, right? This year, there's a significant move towards portfolio consolidation. I think on the talent side, in October 2022, it was more about the employees market. Right now, it's a bit complicated. What do you say, Bharat? That's one thing where it's hard to say that it's currently a purely employers market. Do you want to add a few points on that?
Absolutely, Abhishek. Yes, there has been a change 2022 to 2023. In fact, one of the pieces of research that we conducted at Everest Group is around employer branding and what is the perception of employees on different GBS organizations, especially given there have been changes in the last 12 months, right? For example, in 2022, most firms were happy to get the right talent. Today, amidst a broader global slowdown and many organizations requesting their employees to come back to office, overall, we are also seeing some of the employees may be a little less satisfied as compared to what it was last time. In fact, some of our overall employer branding scores have taken a dip. This is across India, Philippines, US, UK, Poland, and so on. But having said that, there's a lot more. There seems to be a lot more focus across GBS and also for employees to look into, hey, what more can we deliver from value standpoint now that we know what our roles are? More concerted effort in terms of trying to add, Abhishek, to your earlier point, productivity, cost, and so on. So that's really the focus that we are also seeing. So kind of a mixed bag as we also see the whole hybrid model reach the next equilibrium. We will see some of this continuing.
Absolutely. And, speaking of market sentiment, it's moved a bit of a U-turn from a seller's market to a buyer's market, as we see. And let's look at some of the factors, which are driving a lot of the buyer's market behavior on the next page. Yeah. So if you look at, growth through much of the later part of 2021 and the first 3 quarters of calendar year 2022, if you look at the growth or the year-on-year organic, constant currency growth for leading service providers in the IT BPO space, it was consistently high, right? Significantly higher than what people had seen in the first few quarters of 2021. What that did was that, whenever there's consistent demand, consistent growth, it just gives a lot of impetus for providers to hold pricing, to, have control over how they want to kind of run the commercials. And that's all driven by the fact wherever demand outstrips supply, right? Now, if we look at the right-hand side of this chart, growth has significantly slowed down as compared to what we saw, last year. In fact, basis the latest information that we have, it's almost getting similar to the kind of growth rates which we saw, either kind of, in the early stages of the pandemic or pre-pandemic. So what this has done is that the moment growth starts to slow down, there are pipeline improvement pressures within sales teams, and the whole seller's market behavior quickly moves to, hey, we need to sell more. Let's just make sure that we can make the most out of the opportunities of the market, right? Because the demand really isn't as high, especially in discretionary spend, as it was perhaps a year ago. So that's one aspect. The other thing which is driving a bit of a buyer's market is attrition, right? There was also a demand side issue seen during 2022. We've all heard terms like the Great Resignation and the talent crunch, which was happening, and nowhere was it more evident than the attrition, which was seen through most of the last calendar year. In fact, there were different, depending on which location you're talking about, especially in the hotbeds of IT talent. The joke used to be that you could actually throw a stone and it would hit someone with 5 or 7 job offers in their hand, right? And the percentage hikes were like in multiples of 30s, right? It wasn't about a 20% hike. It's like, oh, he was at X and now, getting 1.6X. That was like the common growth. Now that has actually come down a lot. One, the opportunities and the job offers available for such high hikes have toned down, as the situation on the demand side has come down, and that's also led to a significant reduction in overall attrition levels, right? And as Bharat and I talked about, that it's a bit of a complicated talent market for commoditized skills. Yes, it's gone down significantly, but there are pockets of high demand skills or niche skills which still might be commanding the roost. But if you look at the overall talent and from a cross-sectional talent perspective, attrition definitely has decreased significantly. But do you want to, I've talked more about the outsourcing side, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about the GBS and in-house delivery? Because that, I think, shows some interesting trends as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, post-pandemic, there has been an increased sentiment towards the in-house model. Quite a few organizations set up their new delivery centers in offshore, nearshore locations. In fact, quite a lot of them even expanded their existing setups. We're seeing significant growth in the FTE size that are residing in these in-house centers across the globe. In fact, we've seen about 300 plus setups in the last few years, and the interesting part is about 2/3 of that were all first-time adopters. Now, what's really changed? Again, growth in the in-house does not necessarily mean loss of sentiment or reduction in engagement with the third-party side of the business, but there is just more conscious focus towards what organizations want to retain in-house. Part of that is driven by cost optimization. Part of that is also to build strong adjacencies with core business, retain certain IP or certain process-centric, certain business-centric activities in-house. For instance, we see several life sciences, biopharma organizations, offshore activities such as clinical trials monitoring or biostatistician support or even scientific writing. These are all fairly complex areas, and of course locations like India are able to offer a fair bit of talent to help bridge the gap that you see in some of the source geographies, and also make up for a fair bit of cost savings as well. And there's a broader aspect as well. We've seen, especially in the last 12 to 18 months, more so actually in the last 6 to 12 months, several organizations are kind of looking inwards. A lot of operating model transformations focus on trying to understand, hey, what more can we do to make our structure better? How can we infuse productivity as an element versus look for incremental upgrades? So as part of broader transformations, again, conscious decisions towards having own delivery centers in offshore, nearshore locations is also shaping up as an important element. In fact, on that note, we would love to hear from you. Here is a poll question for all of you. How do you see the in-house GBS model grow in 2024? Do you see that decreasing, not much of a change, increase, or significant increase, meaning a lot more happening in-house? How do you see that? Do click on the options on the screen and share your thoughts. Yeah.
So, Bharat, one of the themes
yeah.
Sorry.
Go on, Abhishek.
Yeah. One of the things which I wanted to kind of bring up was, is there also, as things kind of, is there also one of the drivers being the skill retention, right? Especially as, many organizations had a bad time during 2022, where almost entire teams were wiped off due to attrition, right? And then that tribal knowledge on the service provider side, right, where they can literally not control it. So do you see that being a factor as well?
No, absolutely. In fact, the need for housing sustainable talent and to retain that in-house and closer to business has been a critical driver. Not just that, Abhishek. In fact, the last 12, 18 months, we've seen many organizations take a lot of efforts to improve business context in their offshore, nearshore teams. This would mean, banks using AR, VR technology for offshore resources to visualize what does it look for a customer walking into a bank or seeking an investment advice, right? We see retail firms having racks and shop floor type designs in offshore, nearshore centers, and they're kind of lifting and shifting solutions created in locations like India and placing them right in the US. So there has been a lot of such efforts to ensure that talent is also at the core of this whole in-house model growth that we've seen. Okay, we've got a fair bit of response, about half of the participants. Let's end the poll here and look at the answers. Abhishek, this doesn't come as a surprise. Again, 2/3 believe that the model is going to increase.
Yeah, absolutely, and spot on. Because if we were to, and I'm actually not surprised that the significant decrease is a no response, right? So yes, I mean there could be a slight decrease, but almost 80% are either status quo or increasing. Right, so that's a very positive sign. The one thing, just continuing on the discussion we were having a minute ago on the skill part, was also is that I've been working in the outsourcing, offshoring space, professional services for 2 decades. I think it's now that a lot of enterprises are getting the art of the continuum right. You mentioned, Bharat, that it's not that, hey, shut down outsourcing and move it here. It's just about right places at the right point. So not like a full shuffle, but more of a continuum. Hey, these are services, which are being kind of done by our partners. We'll just do a bit of a rebalancing and then kind of, mapping those as well to create an overall better experience rather than piecemeal things in silos. Now, again, is it there in every organization? Perhaps not, but I'm definitely seeing more in conversations with the sourcing stakeholders at enterprises. So any comment on that would also be helpful, Bharat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, revisiting target operating models, having more clarity over work placement decisions. These are top priorities for enterprises that are managing both third party and their own delivery centers as well, and especially taking advantage of hybrid to access talent in areas where they may not have a direct presence. That's also adding both to the benefit and also to a bit of complexity. So having those governance and operating models and right work placement strategies is becoming absolutely critical. The third party and the in-house models are not seen as competition, but seen more as a collaboration to jointly drive broader enterprise outcomes and address customer needs. So that's kind of the maturity and the trajectory in which we see several organizations take this forward. Right. On that note, we also wanted to invite all of you listening us today to take our key issues survey. As most of you may be aware, every year around the calendar year and time, we run this study, a survey-based analysis to capture the pulse of the whole IT and business process services landscape. Here is where industry leaders across enterprises, GBS, service providers, they take our survey and address questions pertaining to what are the major concerns, what are the major opportunities, expectations, trends, and so on for 2024. Do check out the chat window where we have pasted the link for you to take this survey. Do also register for our webinar. And if you want to check out some of our past content, we also have that both in our website and on our YouTube channel as well. This has been something that we've been running for the last few years, and we're seeing not just point in time references, but we're also seeing time series and trends in terms of how things have moved over time. It will be great to get your participation and inputs as well. All right. With that, let's move on to the next section. Is where we talk about the implications on pricing and commercials, right? The price movements, differences between GBS and supplier rates, and so on. Abhishek, you mentioned that this is a fairly interesting year in some ways, right? We've seen a fair bit of changes. In some ways, you could argue that the year started on a high, but is kind of seeing some bit of fluctuations. Where is this whole market heading? What are leading price movement trends telling us?
Sure, Bharat, absolutely. And if you go to the next page, I've just put an extract of the latest version of a complimentary short, punchy report that we release every 6 months called the Price Index, right? If we were to and we cover this across three domains. One, IT standard services, IT advanced services, which is more of the premium skills, and then BPO. This slide focuses on the IT services part. Now, if we look at even the advanced or even the standard services, which some might say, generally tend to be commoditized, etc., the historical price trend, for the US and India, a 12-month change, was something around 2.6% for the US and 3.1% for India. That's an increase, right? If you look at the same future trend, it's almost taken a reverse, right? So we expect the next 12 months movement to be somewhere between mostly flat, right? Slight increase perhaps for the US geography, and in fact a decrease in India, right? So what happens with India and large delivery geographies is that the large talent pool, yes, it's great when demand is high and you can fulfill it, but when there's a bit of a constriction on demand, prices tend to fall steeper because there's just so much of capacity available. Right? Even for IT advanced services, the way we were to look at it, the price increase last year was as much as 4.5 to 5.5%, right? Which is significant, right? And this is all at an averaged out basis, right? And it just takes out the outliers, right? And at a portfolio level, a 5% increase can be significant when we're talking about millions of dollars of spent. The future trend, if we were to look at it, it's again maybe slightly more than flattish. We could look at a little over 1%. And mind you, these are still skills which are data science, full stack, cybersecurity, which are still hard to find. So even those, if you look at it, much of the increase is going to be driven by cost of living adjustment clauses, which might further be negotiated down, right? So that's basically coming from that. So overall, prices are expected to remain stable. Obviously, because there's much of it is driven by discretionary spend cuts. Right? Everything is being scrutinized to the final level. Deal sales cycles are longer, decision cycles are longer, and whenever this happens, it moves, like we said, from a seller's market to a buyer's market, where enterprise procurement, really drives the rate at which they want to buy, and that's going to be having an impact on the pricing. On the BPO side, if you move to the next page, the situation is fairly similar. Even in line with other services, the last 12 months, the historical change was anywhere between roughly around 3% across both geographies. It's actually expected to go down slightly, ever so slightly. So again, in the broad sense, we can think of it to be flat, but we can actually expect a slight reduction in the pricing going forward. Again, linked to some of the factors which I spoke about. Now here, it's less to do with discretionary spend, but overall it's more to do with the fact that, hey, if overall costs need to be trimmed, the CFO or the CXO offices will take a look at every bit of spend and use their negotiation leverage to either kind of, go for cost of living adjustment waivers, renegotiation happening at a lower rate, higher productivity increases. So all of that, from an overall basis, leads to a bit of a dip in pricing. At best, it might just remain stable. Right? So that's kind of that's what the outlook looks like from the perspective of how pricing were to move. So while we're talking about price movement, we do have one offer for the attendees. We are offering a complimentary price check and list briefing. So should you be interested, we can you can choose the function for the price check and 3 locations, and the list from where you can choose is actually being shared in the chat window. We'd request you to go through that and enter the details, and post that we can share a short kind of summary of the current pricing for those roles, and also offer a quick 30-minute discussion on some of the drivers and implications of the current pricing around this. Yeah. So look forward to having those conversations with you. Right. So, Bharat, again, in that vein, I've talked about pricing on the pure outsourcing side. There's always been an interesting debate about whether third party is commercially more competitive or in-house. Depends on what we include in the mix, right? Of course, but I think it'll be good to talk about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Abhishek. In fact, as cost pressures start increasing, right, the conversation is, hey, are there certain processes that I'm better off doing it in-house? Is that going to provide me a less expensive environment? Again, what we've done is we've gone back and analyzed the price, the contracts, and also the cost of doing similar activities in-house across different activities, different processes. While generally we've seen the third-party costs to be largely comparable or even cheaper in some cases, we have noticed, especially in mature at-scale in-house delivery centers, the cost of operations could be 5 to 10% lower as compared to third party. Again, this is more seen on managed services or rather largely rule-based transactional kind of activities. Potentially, these could also be services where third parties may not have a mandate or an incentive to directly transform or change the way work is being delivered as part of the original contracts. Uh, but the point here being, there are scenarios where the in-house model could prove to be less expensive as compared to the third-party model. But then again, here's the catch, right? Firstly, is the cost savings, does it really offset the cost of insourcing? Um, when organizations do build a business case for insourcing, there is significant effort involved in rebadging, right from integrating third party into your organization, talent, skilling, banding, salary adjustments, fair bit of change management happens out there. So one of the big questions that often GPS organizations in-house they ask is, hey, is the cost of insourcing really going to offset the savings that you could potentially gain by having this in-house? The second question that we're seeing more often than not, we're seeing the in-house model answer this from asking the question as to, hey, what more can I do? The question is now, hey, are there certain areas that are better delivered from a third-party model versus necessarily retaining in-house? Again, this goes back to my earlier point of competition versus collaboration. Are there areas where the in-house and the third party can collaborate and deliver it better versus necessarily move it in-house only because it's fractionally cheaper? And of course, the last point is, what is the type of work that's under question? Is that something that could potentially be transformed using technologies such as Gen AI? Is that something that is going to be quite core to the organization, that it's not just the cost saving, but there are more adjacencies that you could drive out of that? So some of these are the real questions that we hear organizations look at when they debate between the third party and the in-house model. In fact, at least for most mature organizations that we are interacting with, we're seeing a lot more clarity on how to run their third party and in-house, even if there are cost differences, or the in-house model is going to be a bit more cheaper. That's Abhishek. That's where we really see this. Both coexisting, but being very conscious as to retaining different parts of activities in different destinations. Okay.
Correct. Go ahead, Bharat.
Yeah. So that's really where we are seeing the philosophy, we're seeing the mindset currently heading. With that, let's also move on to the key trends that we expect to play out in the near term. Talk about the tenets of a strong buyer's market, GPS commercials, and most importantly, key actions for sourcing leaders as well. Again, Abhishek, we've been tracking this for a fair bit now. Not all of these trends may essentially be new one, but some of them do have newer implications as well as we head into 2024. How do you see this evolving?
Yeah, Bharat, absolutely. It's a very changed market, right? As we talk through things, usually what happens is that ups and downs are part of how the market behaves, but within such a short time frame, right? If you were to look at, let's say, 2020, there was a lot of gloom, uncertainty about what's going to happen during the pandemic, right? How are things going to be delivered? What's going to be the demand cycle? Suddenly going up, then again coming down. Then this has implications more in terms of how quickly the market seems to change. And honestly, one can never be absolutely certain that, hey, this downturn or low demand situation is going to stay. Maybe things get to a digital transformation V2, right? Phase, and suddenly you need more people. But again, given the information that we have currently, and also considering some macroeconomic indicators and geopolitical instances, what we can do is just try and project as to what we expect, at least in the near to midterm, and we'll talk about some of these things, right? So see, there's four things that we want to kind of cover. One, I've already mentioned that the pace of increase in FTE pricing has moderated, materially in the past 6 months. We expect mostly flat or minor increases for certain skills. And the reductions mostly could happen where supply rationalization is happening. Like I said, portfolio diversification is now moving to portfolio consolidation, right? So that's where obviously, procurement leverage can kind of, come through. The second element, which seems to have becoming a ferocious, having a ferocious re-entry into the game, is what I'd call, the consistency in use of outcome-based models. Right? In 2021 and to 2022, the whole game suddenly moved towards getting talent from wherever. And both enterprises and providers wanted something that was simple, easy to deliver without getting into too much of the finer details. Now, as things again get into more of a buyer's market, the questions are coming through. Hey, what about the innovation? What about the transformation? And all those nice things which are part of supplier proposals, we haven't really seen them, right? So how do you put skin in the game, which is truly skin in the game, not just something which the suppliers anyways used to deliver or has to deliver, and they put a bit of a premium on that. So anything wherever possible, it could be linked to net promoter score, number of units sold. This is kind of something which is definitely increasing, and everyone is putting it on the table. Right? The third element is the financial engineering, and we do have a page a few minutes later where we talk about things like investments, right, or deal sweeteners like innovation fund, cost of living adjustment waivers, rate card discounts, discounts for higher level of offshoring, because suppliers make a better margin on that. And we do foresee that providers will be forced to innovate around financial structuring in the current macroeconomic environment. Another example could be payment terms, right? Especially for cash-strapped industries, we expect that to be a differentiator. If one of the suppliers agrees to 90 days, whereas the other is stuck at 45 days, that could actually swing the decision, right? Unless there's a significant difference in solution quality. And then finally, basically, there is a need for for shoring across locations, right? So enterprises are looking for software product engineering services support in nearshore geographies. So while we do anticipate enterprises to increase offshoring, right, to get talent supply, it doesn't mean that the requirement for talent in onshore and nearshore geographies kind of decreases. I think it's going to be, like I said, an overall mix of the right skills at the right place, right? And also to build in some buffer in case a talent crisis situation does come up later.
Yeah. Abhishek, one question here. The last few years, we've been hearing about automation, even RPA, intelligent automation, playing a role in how pricing or how certain optimization could also potentially happen. How do you see that impacting as we navigate through 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. See, overall, I think there's a couple of things on how automation may play out, and you'll find it interesting that there's still many deals where there's a lot of talk about automation. Oh, we're partners and we work with them, but the moment you peel the onion and check how much has been delivered, it's absolutely minuscule, right? It's like, oh, there were 10 things they didn't allow us, and this and that. I think one thing is going to happen, that especially in those places, we will see more of that being applied, either by the same supplier or by someone else, who comes in, right? So that's one. The second element which is playing is the layer around Gen AI and some of these next generation technologies which hold a lot of promise. There's a lot of use cases being developed, some POCs being done, but the commercial impact is yet to be seen. Right? our belief is that, between kind of, November, December 2023 till about 6 months after that, or the first half of 2024, that is going to be the period where we will start to see some of those impacts inked into the overall financials of a contract, right? So interesting times for automation. I won't say only for Gen AI. There's still enough and more to be done, even in contracts where standard kind of, automation still needs to be applied with the right kind of rigor, and impact baked in. Okay. Right. So, given this context, let's, if we could just do another quick poll, rather simple one, around, are we seeing increased bargaining capacity with suppliers, right? And, the three answers: yes, no, and if you're not sure, or if you see it swinging both ways, you might want to mention, cannot say.
So it's a pretty interesting question, right? Again, going back to 2022, as you said, it's like, hey, get me the talent, let's get the process rolling. There is some change to it. But at the same time, there is still demand for niche talent, niche capabilities driving certain transformation initiatives. And it almost also feels like, Abhishek, at some level, enterprises also empathize and understand, hey, it's not easy for even providers to maybe reduce their pricing. Maybe they're already operating at a fairly optimized rate yet. So I'm curious to see how the results of this poll shape up. What do you think?
Yeah. Correct. This is going to be an interesting one because again, like I said, depending on two things: one, which supplier posturing, right, enterprises are facing, which supplier they're interacting with, and what's really the service in scope. That's what's going to decide, how much of a bargaining power, has increased, right? And because, this is something which generally, I won't call it secretive. It happens in pockets, one-to-one between suppliers and enterprises over time. It's hard to kind of, predict which way it goes. Logically, one might think that it's increased, but again, that's why we're getting this poll, to get the feedback from folks who actually been in recent situations. I think we have about more than half of the attendees having. Oh,
there it is.
Very, very interesting. I think close to, it's hard to say. So yes, I mean, the no part seems to be low, right? So it's less than 20%, which definitely means that it's tilting towards, better bargaining power, but we cannot say that it's like a full home run, right? Roughly kind of, 4 out of 10 or 38% saying yes. But the most interesting part for me is the cannot say, right? I think the point I was making around who we're discussing with, and now that people have answered, I can actually mention, I asked this question to 4 or 5 of our senior strategic sourcing clients, stakeholders, and the answer was broadly similar, that yes, they're seeing some more, but can they be comfortable that, hey, we are in control right now and we call the shots? Perhaps not, right? There's still some elements either where there's a very niche or difficult skill to find, right, where they're finding it hard because the business still has, the supplier might have the backing from the business, right, that, hey, you have my blessing, I only like working with you, that's it, right? The other element could also be just the positioning which the supplier as a whole has within the portfolio, right? Sometimes the knowledge that other suppliers have tried to deliver this service and failed miserably, which sometimes does get around to an incumbent. The history does get around because people talk to each other, they get to know each other, and that gets used as an advantage. So depending on the situation, it could swing both ways. So yeah, it's interesting to see almost 45% go that way. All right. So the other element, while we talked about flat FTE pricing, no surprises that there is a significant cost pressure. It's expected to remain in that position. So the enterprise objectives, if you were to just look at where we were present in deals, in almost 100% of the cases, competitive pricing was one of the key priorities or objectives of the RFP. Right. This is definitely there. The second element is, if you look at it, is also very commercially oriented. Right. That in about 77%, they mentioned that improvement in process efficiencies, which overall leads to a lower total cost of ownership as a driver, was also the case. Right. And then the other elements were more around, high quality talent, credentials, and interestingly, transformation of the delivery model as a stated objective, was seen in about 30% of the cases, which is understandable because not every RFP can be totally transformational. Right? There are some which might be just, hey, this is a set of, let's say, applications we just need to keep the lights on, right? Or it could be kind of, on the BPO side where it's just about, hey, keep it running, keep it just, broad efficiencies, but we don't have the budget to kind of go for an overall, revamp or transformation. But net cost saving is likely to remain top of mind for many enterprises, especially as cash preservation remains a priority. If we move ahead, I talked a few minutes back about deal sweeteners, right? Many of these had actually disappeared in 2022, right? Maybe some bits and pieces remain depending on the deal size, but these are now back with a bang. So I'll just give a few examples as to the ones we're seeing. Volume discounts, definitely, as people are looking at consolidating portfolios, either via a structured consolidation exercise or even on an ongoing basis. One of the things which is clear is that the more volume related or book of business discounts suppliers can offer, the better the chance of they getting business, right, overall, because as the spend increases beyond a $50-60 million level annually, these can be quite significant at a portfolio level. There's also elements around financial engineering, right, especially to meet certain cash flow requirements in a particular year, aligning with the CFO objectives. That really counts a lot when it comes to to deals being signed. Another interesting element which has come up is offshore related discounts. So for example, if in the deal scenario at a certain point, and it's pre-agreed, if there is a certain amount of offshoring which can be reached or hit, there is an additional bonus or discount for the service provider. And that's driven by the fact that generally suppliers have a better margin profile for offshore delivery. So it's a bit like sharing parts of that margin by offering a better price should the client work alongside the service provider. So aligned objectives, right, to get to a higher degree of offshore level, right? And that's kind of something being seen quite significantly. The final one, which is not new, but people are using it more and more as they get into renewal cycles, is a sole source discount. That if the client were to choose or renew without getting another competitor in the play, they're ready to offer some sort of a discount. It could be an investment, it could be a straight discount, it could be a mix of that, basically trying to dissuade the enterprise from going competitive, right? Which is a cost, it's an effort on both sides, both the supplier and the client. So that's another way in which this might be structured, and sometimes it's also includes significant either investments or a change in the overall commercial model to include a much better linkage with outcomes. So we're seeing some interesting cases around that as well.
In fact,
All right.
if I could add to that, Abhishek, one of the other things that we are noticing, and this is especially for organizations that also have in-house delivery centers in offshore locations. Some of the offshore delivery locations are fairly mature procurement and strategic sourcing teams sitting in locations like India and Poland. And some of these teams are actually starting to take up a lot of vendor management related activities as well. In fact, vendor governance is one of the fairly more mature areas where the information for the quarterly business reviews or annual business reviews, assessing the SLA's compliance and in general the performance of vendors. This is something that's been happening for a while, but we're also seeing some of the offshore delivery centers take a more prominent role in even analyzing, what could be best fit additions to contracts or additional sweeteners that could potentially get added at the time of renewals. For example, by centralizing some of these vendor management activities, large organizations that run multiple contracts with multiple providers, they are having a better picture and better clarity over how supplier performance is happening across different contracts, across different entities and businesses that are being supported. That's kind of even helping them probably rationalize some of the rate cards to arrive at a meaningful discount, something that's more programmatically driven, and also increase the bargaining capacity as well. So this is one big trend that we are seeing: the in-house model taking a more active role in a more centralized monitoring of vendors and accordingly supporting the strategic sourcing aspect.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked a little bit about what we expect. Let's get into some actions, which we believe as enterprise sourcing, strategic sourcing stakeholders, what could be some actions to be able to get the most commercial value from deals. So, action number one is what we call that, yes, it's perfectly fine to ask for highly competitive rates, but we also see that we should remain competitive within contemporary norms, right? And as you can see on the chart shown, we should avoid what we call hyper-competitive pricing, right? Now, a majority of unit rates, if they fall on the extreme left or extreme right, what we call hyper-competitive or inflated pricing, that's a bit of a problem. And what we mean is, if you look at the market profile, the 20th percentile and 80th percentile, yes, some roles could be between that in a portfolio, which is fine. But if majority of them fall in any of these, there could be issues. So inflated pricing, no surprises. The issue is that enterprises stand to lose money. It's a value dilution element, and eventually the example I like to take is, in a way, if you're paying extremely high prices to your suppliers, you're cross-subsidizing your competition because they're going to take the extra margin earned on that and give your competitors in the same industry a better price. So that's definitely a position where no one wants to be in. But conversely, if everything gets pushed to hyper-competitive pricing, the typical tendency is that the quality of talent available, right, or the interest level available from the supplier actually goes down over time. It's one thing to make the sale, but then actually while delivering, you can see the difference in service quality, right? There's also another downside to this, and this is a live example where we've seen at one of the large financial services companies, is that they got a great deal, both in terms of pricing, committed productivity. The overall package seems too good to be true. But what's happening is that the supplier is continuing to serve them just because they like their logo on their client list. But in fact, they're having to deliver the services at a loss. Now, right now, it doesn't matter to this enterprise because they're getting a great deal. But if they were to move suppliers from one to the other, the service quality, the service efficiency is nowhere where it was supposed to be, right? So something which might look in the short term very attractive from hyper-competitive pricing, in the long term, it could actually come and right back. So it makes sense to have a decent margin profile, for the supplier, and that generally kind of comes through if bulk of the rates are somewhere close to the median, plus minus here and there, rather than extremely hyper competitive. Another element which we see is what we call role inflation, right? And what this means is that suppliers trying to push through their team members who don't have the requisite experience or the requisite amount of knowledge or certifications, to take on roles and push them as, hey, this is a senior stakeholder, or this can play, he or she can play the role of program director, or he or she can, play the role of a project manager, etc. And much of this actually comes through where there's no consistency or transparency within the enterprise on how they define a particular role, right? Because that's when it's very easy to take the supplier's view on what they see as a project manager or a lead or a senior tester or a test manager versus some fundamentals which are in place. So the second action which we think enterprises should take is to standardize rate card structures to ensure consistency within the portfolio, to avoid things like overlapping roles, different suppliers having similar roles with different descriptions, or different roles with exactly similar shape and size. It leads to a lot of confusion. Role definitions could be different. There could be different rates agreed for practically similar roles, right? Supplier A versus supplier B on the same client. Or things like, very broad segments of years of experience. We've seen rate cards where things are structured like, hey, type A, 0 to 5 years. Now, this is a significant difference between someone with a year of experience and 5 years of experience, right? Similarly, 6 to 10 is a wide range. It should actually be quite lower. So net, it's important to define very clearly what the job family is, what the role hierarchies are, and then a very detailed role description, not just two lines or 3 lines here and there, down to the level of detail of experience, certifications, what kind of specific client experience that the person needs to be, especially for senior roles, so that it's very clear that we have the right people delivering the right kind of job. So this, I think, is a structural element which needs to change. The third action is more around while as getting into an RFP process, for vendor consolidation or something, I think it's also better to invest time in understanding, doing some pre-work to understand which are the most productive or effective vendors in the portfolio, right? And this could be things like price competitiveness, how they're performing committed SLAs, how they perform on ongoing efficiency and innovation themes. And then there's also subjective factors like how flexible have they been, what was their rigor and speed in making talent available during the tough times, right? And then responsiveness during dispute resolution. So what this does is that when proposals come in an RFX situation, enterprises are not just looking at the flashy material in their proposals and those commitments. They actually can then compare and contrast. Hey, right now they're giving us all these commitments, but in the past 3 years, they really faltered on all of this talk around flexibility and getting talent, speed to market for talent, right? So that, I think that kind of a pre-work really, really helps as some of the proposals come in and decisions need to be made. I think the final action that we had was around pricing models. Now, a lot of stakeholders in the industry often talk and have a discussion with me also, is that, hey, why can't everything just move to an outcome based, or why can't we have everything unit based? Why are we counting for how many hours people are spending? So it's not just about getting to the most advanced model. We believe there's a place and time for everything, right? Input based, output based, or outcome based. For starting the relationship, or where the ask is very unclear, it's not well defined, it might make sense to start with a simple and effortless model like an input based, right? Where you're paying for time, and then eventually you move into something more sophisticated. The output based model is very pertinent, where there's a strong baseline and consistency or homogeneity in kind of activities being delivered, right? So things like per invoice model, or types of calls, or types of tickets being resolved. If there's a good enough data baseline for that, it makes all the more sense. But if there's a huge variability, huge ups and downs, significant heterogeneity in the effort required to deliver something, maybe the benefits of such a model will be very diluted, right? And then outcome-based, obviously, it's complex to implement. We need a strong relationship, etc. I think rather than just jumping to a supposedly sophisticated pricing model just because it looks good and others have done it, might not be the right thing. It's all about the context and the maturity of both the service provider and the enterprise and the underlying requirements, which should drive the best of the the best of the pricing models. Right. So these were kind of, in summary, the four actions. I know that we do have a few questions. But I think there was one as I looked through on the page 18, in-house. So I think there was a question from John that
Yeah. So
is
the
in-house.
question was
Take
when we compare the GPS and the supplier, is the case of the in-house model being cheaper? Is that more of an offshore scenario? Yes, more often than not, it's more prominent on the offshore side. But there are instances where if the provider is also predominantly delivering from the same near shore location as where the in-house center it, you could probably see similar phenomenon there as well. But more often than not, we see this on an offshore space. Abhishek, in fact, on that note, I had a question. These days, we also see a lot of third-party providers looking at delivering from tier two locations. How successful has that been? Because there is always a cost versus a talent play that you would see.
Sure. Yeah, Bharat, so that's a good question. See, it's been a mixed bag. If I were to tell you, where we've seen this being successful, is where the kind of services being delivered, right, or the scope of the ask is one which has a high degree of predictability, right, or the skills required, right. Let's say it's like application maintenance, right, where it's unlikely that the skill requirements are going to change from one period of time versus the other, right. Business process services have been successful. Application maintenance services have been successful. Basic AD kind of work, let's say, focused on one technology, right? Wherever someone has built some kind of a pool of resources, that's been successful. Where it gets difficult is if a lot of concentration happens in a tier 2 or tier 3 location, and for skills which are evolving. That hey, for 3 months we need these kinds of skills. Next 3 months we might need something totally different. It's a fast-changing environment. In those cases, notwithstanding the traffic, right? Bangalore, Hyderabad, Delhi, Mumbai come into play because just the talent pool available. Even if there's firefighting, you can get a cybersecurity architect quickly, right? Hey, we need this person. Now, getting that person or that individual right now, a lot of things are remote, so one can argue that it works anyways. But then, we're also in parts back to office. Some teams are co-located, and it makes sense to have teams there. So whenever there's a fast-changing environment or a variety of skills required, that's where it tends to be difficult because these tier 2 locations won't have that variety of skills at scale available at this point in time.
Got it.
I think there was one question, and these were related questions around, the commercial models for managed services within application development in agile environments. So again, there's a range of models that we see in agile environments. I'll talk about two which seem to be, especially as folks are trying to get into managed services type models within this. The two most prominent ones seem to be one which is a pod-based model, right? Now, again, this is more kind of managed capacity in a way, but pod-based model is being used much extensively due to the simplicity of things being available, simplicity of measurement, there's visibility, there's flexibility, but then also some productivity commitment in respect to increased kind of, the velocity per se. And the other one, which is mostly being used, is what we call the per story point model, right? That's where people pay per story point developed, and that kind of delinks it from effort taken. Okay,
all right.
shall we move ahead?
There are quite a few questions, but then of course we're almost on top of the hour as well. The earlier offer again, we want to bring that back. So do check out the link in the chat window and select the function and the 3 locations, and we'll be happy to share the benchmarks and also set up a follow-on conversation with you. Do also take a look at some of our blogs on pricing, commercial, and GBS themes. We've got quite a few reports as well that have a lot of forward-looking views and fairly comprehensive research and analysis. With that, we kind of come to an end of the core presentation that we had. Janet, back to you.
Thanks so much, Abhishek and Bharat. That was great, really great information. So if you enjoyed today's program, please visit the conference board at conferenceboard.org/webcast for a full roster of our webcasts. Here's a couple that are upcoming that you might be interested in. Wanted to also highlight to you several conferences. So this one's the People 2023 conference, November 2nd and 3rd in New York. More information on the website. I would also highlight one adjacent to this discussion, which is the Global Business Services Conference on November 16th in the website. And there will be a link to more information about that in the attendee chat. And lastly, there's great information to be garnered from the TCB Insights app. This has recently been launched, and you can connect with peers in your community, register for events, find research podcasts, webcasts, and more. So download today. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you.